The following podcast is part of the Underdog Sports Podcast Network. For advertising information or to find more great podcasts, visit us at www.theunderdogsports.com and follow us on Twitter at RealTheUnderdog.
You are now in the Underdog Sports Fantasy Hour with Josh Dunn and Anshu Khanna. You are now in the Underdog Sports Fantasy Hour. I am Josh Dunn. I am joined again, as always, by Anshu Khanna. Anshu, not in person this time, but it still feels almost as good.
No, not even close. That was fun. Hopefully we can do it again soon. But I'm doing pretty well tonight. How's it going with you?
It is going well. My Bengals are 0-10. I feel like we're going to finally get that 0-16 season that we've shot for in the 90s so very often. And we'll get to that dumpster fire that is the Cincinnati Bengals. But before we do that, we've got some other games we want to run through, and we've got a pretty big game here on Thursday night. That's going to be the Colts at the Texans, and we're going to be looking at bovadasportsbook.com for all these lines. And the first one is Indianapolis at Houston. This is a big game in the AFC South, Anshu. The Colts come in as 4-point road underdogs. Something tells me, I personally, I don't know what to think of this Houston Texans team. They're coming off of an absolute blowout loss to Baltimore. Obviously, Lamar Jackson won in the quarterback matchup that we were all looking forward to, and Houston just could not get any offense going. What did you make of what you saw out of Houston? Obviously, a significant negative when you look back at what they've done so far this year.
Yeah, Houston is, this is going to be a theme. Both these teams really are tough to pin down, but, this is a Houston team that, as we said and expected, that they would go to Baltimore and have major issues with them. But they've also, they've beaten the Chiefs in Kansas City with Mahomes. They've beaten the Chargers, in LA. They've kept it very interesting with New Orleans at the Saints. It's hard for me to know what they are. And even without JJ Watt, they've won 2 of 3. They beat the Raiders, who look right now like maybe a playoff team. So yeah, like you said, it's just tough to know what they are. Now, this is a team that lost at the Colts about a month ago. So maybe that's a little bit instructive on what we might see this week. But at that being said, I'm not sure if we really have a feel for what they're going to do here. At home, I expect them to score, though.
Yeah, and the big story with Indianapolis is they lose Marlon Mack about halfway through the game a week ago against the Jaguars. Now the Colts are going to have to go to somewhat of a running back by committee. Jordan Wilkins actually missed that game. It looks like he is on track to play Thursday night. Jonathan Williams has the big game this past weekend, and then Nyheim Hines you expect to be in the mix. What do you make? This is a fantasy show. What do you make of this backfield from a fantasy standpoint? I assume at least a couple of those guys are going to be big waiver wire pickups this week.
Yeah, for sure. But anyone's guess is as good as anyone else's right now. Frank Reich came out and said that it's likely to be a committee with all 3 guys being used. Jordan Wilkins has been the handcuff to Marlon Mack throughout this season, with Hines sort of filling that third down role, as you alluded to. But, it's impossible to know exactly who's going to do it. And, whoever it is, if one guy's able to take over, this is a Texans defense that, especially without JJ Watt, has given up yards to running back. So, if Jonathan Williams is able to get it going, if he's able to replicate in any way what he did last week, this is a very useful piece. But again, they must like Jordan Wilkins a lot. They used him, a high pick on him. They've used him as the backup throughout the season. There was some thought that maybe he could end up carrying a decent load out of the preseason, but, got a little bit banged up, as he's want to do over his year or so in the league. So it's a tough call, but I think my inclination is Williams is probably a slightly better option, but I wouldn't go big for either of those guys. I just don't know how who it's going to be.
Yeah, that's a tough call, especially, with what we saw out of Wilkins at times last year. Jonathan Williams has been a little bit of a journeyman over his career, but he did show at least last week that he could carry the load in a pinch. So it'll be interesting to see how they work this out with this backfield. Marlon Mack could miss some time with a fractured hand, and then on the other side of the injury bug, you have T.Y. Hilton, who looks like he could potentially play. Looks like it's going to come down to a game time decision, but I know Jacoby Brissett owners, obviously hope that T.Y. Hilton is able to play this week in a really good matchup from a receiver standpoint.
For sure. I was going to say, even if he doesn't, I mean, I have Zach Pascal in a few leagues. I'm probably starting him. Like I know he hasn't put up the production that you're looking for, but especially with Eric Ebron, it seems like probably out. He's not starting tonight on Tuesday, or he didn't practice today on Tuesday. We're only 48 hours away from this game being played. It's just if he's not playing, it's got to be Pascal and Doyle, and and maybe Hines obviously is a useful piece out of the backfield. So to me, against this Texans defense, which has just been awful against receivers, I think whether or not Hilton plays, I think Brissett's a solid start, and for sure, I really like Zach Pascal if T.Y. Hilton's out.
All right, we've got quite a slate of 12 o'clock games. Now, it's worth noting, the last week of buys here in Week 12. You've got the Cardinals, Vikings. Help me out here with the
Chargers,
last two.
Chiefs.
Yep. So some big bye weeks from a fantasy standpoint. So if you're looking to fill things, hopefully we can give you a couple ideas. And that Colts backfield is a murky, yet potentially a place you could find some value. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the 12 o'clock games. We've got Chicago, who's coming off of a tough loss to L.A., really looking dim for them to even have a chance at making the playoffs. I mean, they really probably have to win all but one game even to have a chance to make the playoffs here, and they'll have an opportunity to get right here against the Giants. They're 6-point favorites at home. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, how are the Bears favored by 6 against anyone right now? Like, honestly, they have been an absolute walking disaster, and boy, you hate to see it, but yeah, they I mean, I think there's a pretty good chance that we see Chase Daniel in this game. And I mean, he's been okay. Might be a good thing for them right now, just because you can just tell that, and we talked about it last week and we've talked about it repeatedly, but Trubisky is not allowing Matt Nagy to be himself, as his play card says. And I feel like, maybe Daniel helps them, and maybe David Montgomery, a week removed from that ankle injury that banged him up last Sunday, maybe, that helps, and he's a little bit better. But for the Giants, I mean, coming off the bye, Saquon should be healthier. Sterling Shepard sounds like he's likely to play this week. Evan Ingram, definitely better than iffy. It seems like he's on the right side of questionable. Darius Slayton came out and looked good. Golden Tate's been good. I like this Giants team right now. I think they and the Bears are going in opposite directions. I love New York +6 if that's the line.
Yeah, so Sterling Shepard, it'll obviously change if he does come back, but Darius Slayton's a guy I wanted to throw out there. He has had 4 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, or 3 games, I should say. Looks like he's developing somewhat of a rapport with Danny Dimes, and yes. I think that he's a guy that you maybe, again, there's going to be some situations this week where you're going to have to fill a slot that you weren't otherwise going to have to, and if Sterling Shepard doesn't play, I think maybe he could provide some value. Even if Shepard does play, he's been dealing with obviously a severe concussion. He's missed several weeks. They considered shutting him down for the whole season, so you wonder if he does get on the field, the type of snap count that he'd be on, and whether or not they look at using him as kind of more of a decoy. But hopefully, if he does get on the field, he's healthy enough to play, and I know that his owners would be happy to see that if they were able to hang on to him as long as he's been out.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Sterling Shepard is it's been so long since we've seen him, but when he did play, he's basically been awesome with Daniel Jones. I mean, they've definitely struck up a rapport, and people quickly forget that Sterling Shepard is really young, and they played together a lot this preseason with Eli Manning not getting a ton of reps. So I think that there's definitely something there, and I'm anxious to see what they look like with him in that offense, because remember that last time we saw them all together, the Giants were kind of interesting in the middle of that season. Remember, they had that comeback victory in Daniel Jones' first game, and I'm definitely interested to see how they use all those guys.
Agreed. All right, what about Seattle at Philadelphia? We talked a lot about Philadelphia last week in their matchup with New England. They come out on the other side of that. They needed a win. They need a win this week. They're really starting to fade in the playoff picture, and I know, Anshu, they've got a couple cakewalks coming up here on the schedule, but this is going to be a true test here at home. Seattle, the 1.5-point underdog on Bovada. They're coming off of a bye. What do you make of this Seattle team going into Philly?
I mean, last we saw of Seattle, they survived that trip to San Francisco, and I'm a little surprised that they're 1.5-point dogs here. I think they are clearly better than Philadelphia right now, especially if Alshon Jeffrey doesn't play. I was a buyer in Philly early and even midway through this season, but it's getting late early for them, like, I mean, like you said, they're 5-5 and they need to get it together quickly. And even at home, they're a much better team, much different team, but I just feel like the Seattle team is going to go on the road off this bye and get it done. So I do really like the Seahawks as money line straight up. I like them as underdogs in this game.
What about fantasy-wise? I know Philadelphia is still trying to get healthy. Jordan Howard's questionable once again. I know Miles Sanders is a guy you've had your eyes on, obviously. Is he somebody that you can maybe plug and play here in a bye week situation?
I mean, I think so. Like, I think that Seattle did a decent job against San Francisco, but like Raheem Mostert had a pretty good game against them after Matt Breida went out. Tevin Coleman was solid. Like, I mean, you can run. This isn't the Legion of Boom defense, and especially on the road, this is a gettable team, and I think this is a get right spot for Carson Wentz and his tight ends. I think that Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz are both very useful, especially if Alshon Jeffrey's out. I mean, Goddard's basically a receiver for them. So I mean, I do think the Seahawks win, but I could see this being a little bit of a shootout in Philly.
Well, let's hope so for Philadelphia. Obviously, they want to be able to score against that Seattle defense, and Seattle's defense has looked suspect at times, but it seems like they make big plays when they have to. And obviously, Russell Wilson has proven to be one of the most clutch players in the league, if not the most clutch quarterback in the league. And
is he your
even
MVP?
With that intercept, I think Lamar's the MVP right now.
Yeah, I agree.
But I mean, it's close. I think a lot yet to be determined in that MVP race. I know we talked a little bit about Baltimore potentially having a hiccup last week. Obviously, they did the opposite of that, so they've continued to prove me wrong here this year, and I don't think I could pick anybody other than him as MVP at this point, which we'll definitely get to later. But let's move on. Let's go to Carolina and New Orleans. The Saints 10-point favorites at home here on Bovada. This is a big number as the over-unders at 47 as well. New Orleans did have their get-right game against Tampa Bay, and it was, again, Jameis just throwing in an interception after interception. It started with one that wasn't his fault and was followed up by three that clearly were. But Carolina coming off of a really tough loss, and Kyle Allen starting to look like a backup quarterback. And now, if you're Carolina, and he doesn't get things right, what do you make of the Cam Newton situation? But first, let's hear what you have to say about this game.
Yeah, I mean, they're all related. Like, if Kyle Allen, I thought in Lambeau looked really good, and then last week looked like a total disaster, as you've kind of called for throughout this season. Yeah, and it puts them in a really awkward spot. I mean, they drafted one of my favorites. I think both of us kind of liked Will Grier. It doesn't sound like Will Grier is anywhere near getting ready to play for them. Like Ron Rivera and Marty Herney are kind of coaching and managing for their jobs, but and obviously they've staked their reputation a little bit on Kyle Allen by maybe some say prematurely putting Cam Newton on IR. So just an interesting spot and a very tough spot against New Orleans on the road for a defense, even without Marshawn Lattimore likely, that's just been good. And, it's going to be really tough to go on the road, even against a common opponent, and get it done. So, I mean, while, the Saints have shown some cracks in the armor the last few weeks, like, I mean, I think that they're still, they're 10-point favorites for good reason. I actually think that they absolutely would blow out the Panthers in this one. I do think that the Panthers can score. I think the over/under, I believe, at Bovada is around 47. And
yep, you nailed it.
I mean, if that's the case, like, I love the over in this game, but I also love the Saints. I just think that everything that you would want from them, like, this Panthers defense just isn't that good. So I love all the Saints guys in this game.
Yeah, and the Saints, they did it last week, and you expect that they would probably do it again. Drew Brees coming off of a nice performance. You had Jared Cook getting on the board. Michael Thomas did exactly as you expected that he would, Anshu, with a bunch of catches, and he continues to lead the league, and I think he's still on pace to break the receptions record. So a big year for him, and the Saints definitely in a position to kind of pull away in that division. All right, what about Pittsburgh at Cincinnati? This is a battle of teams that just have the injury bug biting them extremely hard right now. Mason Rudolph, if he's not in the concussion protocol, he probably should be, but it's a few other guys. The wide receiver position has really been affected by concussion protocol this week. Juju is potentially going to miss this game, as well as Deontay Johnson. So even though the Bengals 7-point underdogs at home on Bovada, you look at the over-under here at 38.5. This is a stay away for me in a lot of ways, but where do you find some fantasy value in a game like this that has really not a lot of playoff implications unless Pittsburgh can somehow beat the vaunted Bengals at home?
I think
Easy on me.
I mean, I felt like that was a little tongue in cheek with the vaunted, but
Just a little.
so depending on how much you buy into the squeaky wheel narrative, I mean, Tyler Boyd wants the ball. He feels like he should be getting the ball. The Steelers have been very good defensively ever since trading for Minkah Fitzpatrick, but they did give up yards to both Landry and Beckham last week. I feel like we say it every week, but Tyler Boyd is so beyond overdue at this point. I feel like he's a guy I'd be looking at for sure on the Bengals side, and for Pittsburgh, and we don't know what that backfield's looking like. Like you said, the receivers are a tough call, but James Conner too is very iffy for this game. Obviously, if you've got a guy that you feel confident in on any offense playing the Bengals right now, you probably are starting them. But James Washington is that guy. Like, he is the last man standing in that receiver room, and assuming that Juju doesn't play, I feel like, this James Washington's a pretty darn good start too.
Yeah, and James Conner still might not play as well. You look at that backfield. I mean, Pittsburgh's banged up, and before they were banged up, aside from their defense, who's come on strong of late, but didn't look great against Cleveland, this team is not good. They have not been good this year. Mason Rudolph's been terrible. Mason Rudolph's probably best game was against the Cincinnati Bengals when you think back to the Monday night game where he dinked and dunked it his way down the field and ended up putting up a nice stat line. But I just – as many things that are wrong with the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, I just think about Ryan Finley. And if Andy Dalton starts last week against the Raiders, there's no doubt in my mind the Bengals will win that game. And there's no doubt in my mind that Tyler Boyd wouldn't be having the same issues that he's having with not getting the ball. He had a great rapport with Andy Dalton. Ryan Finley is just not very good. As much as I would love to see him be good, it's kind of a blessing in disguise in my eyes that he's not, because the Bengals now, if they have the first or second or third pick in this draft, which they will, they're going to be forced to go out and get a franchise-type quarterback. And I think if Ryan Finley was serviceable, they would honestly think that he may be the quarterback of the future. And a part of me is glad that he's just terrible.
Yeah, I completely understand that, honestly. You suck it up for 9 games of watching him be terrible, and then you get a guy for the next 10 years. I think it's absolutely worth it. It's better that than to have the NFL hell of him being okay. So I fully agree with you, and it obviously sucks for Dalton that it went down the way it did, but I think long term it's going to be much better for you as a Bengals fan.
And probably for Andy Dalton. He'll get a chance somewhere. Sure. I would have to assume he's a starting quarterback somewhere next year with some of the guys that you think about that got starting jobs this year coming into the season. So, and I think he's still a decent quarterback, and I think I'd like to see him on a better team that I'll hopefully end up rooting for.
I think that the fact that they've sucked so much with Finley just highlights how much better Andy Dalton is maybe than people realize.
Yeah, definitely. What about Joe Mixon? I know he's had a few big games. Do you like him again here? I mean, he did a horrible job against Pittsburgh last time, and I think their run defense is a little bit scary. But is he a guy that you like at all still? I mean, he's, like I said, they've at least been getting him the ball at a higher clip.
Yeah, and I think the offensive line's been a little bit better. He's been better. They've found a way to use him better. And beyond that, the Steelers did give up a bunch of yards to Hunt and to Chubb last week. So while this Steelers defense has been really good and they will be keying on Mixon, I think that he's a rock solid start in this game, especially with those 4 teams on bye, and that's 6 usable running backs. So yeah, I definitely think so.
All right, Detroit at Washington, the other team that is tanking hard. The Redskins are 3.5-point underdogs at home on Bovada. Detroit's still dealing with the Matt Stafford injury. I don't know if we're going to see Matt Stafford again this year, but what do you make of this game? We've got 2 backup quarterbacks playing in what could be the dumpster fire of the week, aren't you?
Yeah, it's crazy. The Lions have lost 6 of their last 7 games. It doesn't feel like that to me.
Yeah, they've been in it. They've been
hanging around. I mean, they were within a possession of the Cowboys. They were within a touchdown of the Bears in Chicago. They were within a touchdown at the Raiders. They have not been nearly as bad as their record shows. I keep saying that, and I know they keep losing, but to me, this game, the fact that that the Lions are favored by a field goal on the road shows what Vegas thinks of them, which is that they are clearly a class above a team like Washington. That being said, Washington is going to take the air out of this ball. They are not going to be able to pass whatsoever against Slay and Coleman and this defense. And I mean, I am a full-on believer in the fact that those running backs are going to get going. And again, Jeff Driscoll, he's got a little juice, and he continued to have a little juice last weekend against the Cowboys. So while this game is probably not going to be a huge fantasy extravaganza, I think that it could have the potential to be like somewhat interesting. I think the backfields, like that Detroit backfield, is really interesting.
Yeah, the Detroit backfield's kind of similar to me right now to the Indianapolis Colts backfield when you think about you just don't know what direction they're going to go. Everybody expected after Ty Johnson got cleared with the concussion and that he was going to start this week and take control of that backfield again. And then they end up having Bo Scarborough come in and lead the team in touches and snap count. So I don't know what to make of this Detroit backfield. I don't know who the guy is, but you still would expect Bo Scarborough to be a guy that's kind of at the top there when you think about waiver pickups for the week.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know how to rank them with him. Them and the Colts guys, like I don't think you can definitively say each person's different in terms of who they'd like and who they don't like. But I like on the other side, if Darius Geis is available in your league, like this Lions team has just given up. They've been maybe the worst. I believe they've been the worst statistically against running backs in half-point PPR leagues of any defense. So if Geis is out there, like obviously they unfortunately are kind of splitting, but Geis definitely had some juice last week. Next to Adrian Peterson, I think both those guys are useful in this game.
I like it. All right, what about Tampa Bay and Atlanta? Those are two teams that have no running back production in fantasy lately. But it does sound like Devontae Freeman is close to coming back. There's a big over-under on this game at 51. Atlanta's defense has been better, though, and for that reason, they come in as 4.5-point favorites here on Bovada. Jameis Winston, you look back at the league and some of the records that have been set, and he is getting dangerously close to being in contention for the interceptions record, at least dating back to the merger. I mean, Anshu, this is Jameis Winston. I think I'm losing my words because I'm literally at a loss for them at this point.
I love your Jameis opinions because you were a fan of him in college, but you can objectively look at him now and just know that, like, dude, this guy just loves throwing the ball to the other team, and it's like it just spirals in either way for him. He's such a streaky player, and it's gotten to the point where it's kind of funny to me. Like, I mean, it's annoying, I'm sure, but it's also like, and it's tilting, but it's just sort of, it's fun. You got to watch it. You can't take your eyes away, especially when you look at like Evans and Godwin, and Cameron Brate was amazing last week. And like, just, they've got a lot of pieces and he's somehow sustaining them in an offense where he's throwing, he's turning over the ball 3 times a game basically. And it's just crazy to see, but that's what it is now. And like you said, both these teams are going to score a ton of points, but that also means he's going to throw the ball a lot. And you know what that means, that, there's
it's scary.
There's at least 2 interceptions.
In standard scoring leagues, Jameis is still one of the top quarterbacks because he throws the ball for a ton of yards every single game. His completion percentage is generally not that bad if that factors into it, but he throws a ton of interceptions. So if you're in a standard scoring league, I mean, ride it. Yeah. If he's probably like the 9th or 10th best fantasy quarterback in a standard scoring league.
And unfortunately, a must start against Atlanta.
And a must start.
Yeah.
Oh, in this week, absolutely. But you're scared to start him in any given week in like the format that our league has that you and I are together on. I mean, he is just an absolute, probably the scariest player to have to start week in and week out. And I know it from experience, but it's one of those things. I'm more concerned. Like, is he done? Does he get a chance elsewhere if the Buccaneers give up on him after this year? Does he start somewhere? Does he start in Chicago? Does he start in Miami? Is he a guy that you would be willing to give another chance to in a different situation? I don't know. I think if Bruce Arians, the quarterback whisperer, can't seem to figure him out, I just don't know if there's a spot for him in this league. Maybe the XFL will come calling.
I completely agree with you. I mean, if I would have said, if it was a year ago, I'd say, if he goes somewhere else, he's definitely getting a chance to start. I mean, any smart coach would see that arm talent and think like, hey, got to take a shot on him. But dude, this guy, like Arians and Godwin and Evans and OJ Howard and Brate and Ronald Jones and everything else that they've got, that you can't figure it out and string wins together because you turn over the ball. You cost your team games every single week. I just don't know. Like, he's definitely going to get signed somewhere. Maybe he's in a battle. He certainly would start in Chicago if they weren't able to get Cam or maybe Mariota. But like, it's just hard for any team to look at what the Tampa team has right now and feel like they can improve upon that situation. And so to me, I just don't know how you do that.
That's a great point. And this is a game, if you're a football fan casually, that you probably aren't going to watch too much. But if you are a fantasy football person, there are so many people in this game that you are firing up and that you should feel very confident. You think about Julio, Calvin Ridley. If Devontae Freeman's back, absolutely. And then on the other side of the ball, same thing with the Bucs. You mentioned all the names already. I mean, those are players you've got to start, and this is a game that you want the red zone channel to flip to, unless you own Jameis Winston, because he's probably going to turn it over in the red zone.
You can't tear your eyes away. The one thing I will caveat with is this Buccaneers run defense has been like, it's gotten to the point where it's not a fluke anymore. I mean, they are the number 2 defense against running backs of all the defenses in fantasy football. That's crazy because, like, you think about them and they're just not like, I don't know, they're not like a big draw to me. And, you just assume that anyone's going to run on them. But, I just like, the proof is in the pudding there. Running backs do not score against this Buccaneers defense. Now, everybody else does. They are hemorrhaging yards. And I mean, it is like way, way worse than anyone else in the league against receivers. So, like, Julio and Ridley and even Russell Gage, who dropped a wide open touchdown last week, and of course Matt Ryan. Like, those guys are absolute musts. But and it's just so weird to see a team funnel this way in this day and age. But that is what these Bucs are, and I think that lends itself again to a huge shootout, which benefits both sides.
Agreed. All right, we got Dolphins at Browns. The Browns, obviously, without their best player, Myles Garrett, this week. We talked ad nauseum about that situation on last week's show, and it was pretty close to kickoff last week. So if you didn't get a chance to check that out and you want to hear our thoughts on the Garrett situation, be sure to listen back to that. But Browns, 10.5-point favorites at home on Bovada. The Miami Dolphins have looked better of late, but they're coming off of the loss to Buffalo, and they still seem to be somewhat in tank mode even after the 2 straight wins. But the Browns really need a win just to stay in the playoff hunt. What do you make of this game?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what the Browns are going to look like without their best player, and then one of their probably 5 or 6 best players in Ogunjobi on their defensive line, and it's just going to be a weird game. And like you said, the Dolphins are kind of spry, and had they had Garrett, I would say -10, -10.5 is a great line for the Browns, even with how up and down they've looked. But this Dolphins team, I just have a weird feeling that the Dolphins are going to keep this interesting. I'm not saying they're going to win, but I just feel like it's going to be a weird game after the way the last one ended. I think that the Browns have just had an odd week or 10 days, I guess. So, if they just run the ball with Chubb and Hunt, they should win this game by at least 2 touchdowns. But that Kitchens is probably going to try to get cute, and there's going to be some weirdness. So just a total stay away for me on that line.
Yeah, but I think you could find some value in this game on both teams fantasy-wise. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick has looked pretty good, and they're going to be throwing the ball quite a bit. They'll probably be playing from behind. Devontae Parker has looked really, really good in recent weeks. Mm-hmm. Even Balaj has looked pretty solid for the Dolphins of late. And then on the Browns, you just expect everybody to have one of their better games of the season. I agree with you, though. I don't love that 10.5. I'm not betting on that if I'm betting on this game. I think the Dolphins should keep it somewhat interesting just because that's the type of game that the Browns play closely. They generally don't blow teams out that they're supposed to blow out. And with Freddie Kitchens calling plays, I kind of expect that trend to continue. So I agree. I think that this will be closer than people think. I think it's such a must-win for the Browns that they give the ball to their playmakers, and they have such an immensely more talented roster that I think that ultimately is going to be what wins it for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And if it gets into a situation where the Browns are able to flex their muscles and move the ball up and down the field, like, the Dolphins just don't have a chance of keeping it close in that way. But at the same time, like you said, Devontae Parker is interesting because, again, these safeties, I'm not sure what Demarius Randall's status is. I'm not sure if he's going to catch a suspension for that nasty hit last week, but we know Morgan Burnett's not playing. Like, they can be beat over the top, whether it's Jakeem Grant or Devontae Parker. I think that there is the opportunity for points on both sides for sure.
All right, Anshu, Oakland at New York, and that's the New York Jets. The Jets are 3-point home dogs. They're coming off The Jets, your boy Darnold, again, he just confuses me week in and week out. I don't know what to make of him. I don't know if I think he's good. I don't know if I think he's trash. But Oakland, you mentioned that they look like a playoff team. They didn't last week, but they're winning the games that they're supposed to win, and they're kind of in the driver's seat as far as the playoff push. Do you think that they can come in on the road, travel all the way across the country to New York, and get the win on the road against the Jets?
Well, they're favored to do so, but I kind of look. The Jets have quietly won 2 straight games. Yeah, it was against their division, against Washington and the Giants. Like, not that impressive, but that being said, like a win's a win, and especially after the way they looked before, I think that it's been decent for them. That being said, I think that the Raiders are bum slayers, and that's a good thing. Like you want your team, if they're going to make the playoffs, they
Love
have
that
to,
term.
they are though, right? They've won 3 straight games. They beat the Bengals and Chargers and Lions all at home. They are, they've lost a lot of games on the road, but they've generally, won the games they should win, lost the games they should lose, and kind of split the ones in the middle. That's generally going to get you to 9-7, and will that be enough? We'll see, but I do think that they'll go on the road and get it done against the Jets. And like you, I am anxious to see what Darnold looks like in this game, because I think it's a great test for him, and a good litmus test of whether he's, whether he is trash or whether he is good, because this is a team you can throw on.
Unless you're Ryan Finley.
That's an important caveat. Yeah.
Yeah. Denver at Buffalo. Will this be the last Allen game for Denver? It will not be the last Allen game for Buffalo. So it's the battle of the Allens. Who do you like here? Denver's the 4-point underdog on the road against Buffalo. Buffalo, again, another team that is punching above their weight this year a little bit. They've won the games they're supposed to as well, but they are in a very good position to be the 5 seed here in this playoff.
Yeah, they are. I really like Buffalo here. I just think that at home, their defense really comes to play. And while I was impressed with what the Broncos did last week in Minnesota, should have had that game. I think they've found something in Brandon Allen, at least, the way that he's utilizing what they have, and Noah Fant specifically getting a ton of targets along with Cortland Sutton. I just think that those guys are going to have a lot more trouble getting going against the Bills. Should be a cold game in Buffalo, and this is prime Buffalo, just like 17-3 victory style. So I love the Bills -4 here.
Yeah, and that Denver game last week against Minnesota was interesting. I mean, it was really a tale of two halves. They were up 20-0 at halftime. Brandon Allen ends up only throwing for 258 yards on the day in 17-39. When in the first half, I mean, he was just carrying the ball down the field. Obviously, they were turning the ball over in the opponent's territory. And then in the second half, they can't get any offense going whatsoever. And Minnesota's defense kind of turned things up and got some important turnovers. I don't know about this Denver team. I don't know what to make of them week in and week out. They're tough. They're tough to read. And I don't, they obviously have Drew Lock in the waiting, which you and I have talked a little bit about on this show. I don't know if he gets his chance this year if Brandon Allen continues playing at a mediocre level. You would think at least maybe the last game or two of the season that they would give him a shot. But it's hard to say, because Brandon Allen has done kind of, I guess, enough, a little bit more than Flacco may have done in this position. But I agree. I think Buffalo really this is a game where they should come out and handily take care of Denver. But to your point, it very well could be a defensive struggle, and Bovada's got the over-under at 37, which should prove that.
Oh, man, that's really low. So from a fantasy perspective, not good, and especially because both these teams have been so good against fantasy teams. I mean, Buffalo specifically has just been rock solid, top 3 fantasy defense in opponent scoring. In Denver, obviously, we know about Vic Fangio, and they've been pretty good too. And Chris Harris is going to lock up John Brown, you have to think. So, just not a lot of options for Josh Allen to get the ball around to. Devin Singletary is probably the best start on either side, really. I think because Cortland Sutton's going to have so much trouble with Tre'Davious White, in my mind, that the under might actually hit, with even despite how low that number is.
Wow. Bold statement. We've got another low one here next with Jacksonville and Tennessee. Tennessee in need of a win. Obviously, they have the big win against the Chiefs a couple weeks back, and they're looking to get another big win here against Jacksonville. But the line pretty close. Bovada's got them as 3-point favorites at home. It does as far as Tennessee is concerned. Do you think Tennessee, if they win this game, are you starting to believe in them as a playoff team?
I mean, anyone in that group of like 4 or 5 teams, every time they win, you feel pretty good about their playoff chances, whether it's the Raiders or Titans, Jacksonville's. Both these teams are in that mix. Colts are in that mix. The Titans, since they've switched over to Ryan Tannehill, they've won 3 of 4. Their only loss coming at Carolina. I mean, they beat the Chiefs. That's a nice win to have in your back pocket. I'm interested to see how the Jaguars continue to evolve with Nick Foles. They looked, while they got blown out last week, I feel like he had good numbers, good enough numbers. He left some plays on the field too, and he did feed DJ Chark. I thought that it would be more of a D.D. Westbrook game, but it seems like Chark is still going to be the guy for them. So I think that the Titans are a kind of a really interesting team if they've caught the Ryan Tannehill wave here a little bit. I mean, I don't know if he's good enough, but they seem to feel like they've found something in him a little bit here.
Yeah, I expect Derrick Henry to gash Jacksonville left and right. We saw what Marlon Mack did to them in the first half, and then Jonathan Williams. I mean, I think Derrick Henry is due for another big game as he's been coming on strong of late as well. Mm-hmm. I expect the Titans to run the ball a ton in this game. I think this could be another low-scoring one as well. We saw this game. I think this was a Thursday night game early on in the season.
Like every year.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and Doug Marrone also said he's going to feed Leonard Fournette this game. So I think that, again, the under, even with that low total, might be one to look at.
I agree, Anshu. What about Dallas at New England? This may be the game of the week. It'll be Fox's game of the week. But you got the Dallas Cowboys coming in as 7-point road underdogs. Over-under is 45.5 on Bovada. And New England, they did what they were supposed to do against Philadelphia a week ago, but it sure wasn't pretty. And Tom Brady, he definitely looks like there is some sort of a regression going on here for this guy late in his career.
For sure. I mean, they add Mohamed Sanu, they add N'Keal Harry into this offense, and it's just regressed. I mean, it's regressed over the course of the year. I think that the defense covered up a lot of flaws with this offense. And, obviously when they had Antonio Brown, things were really clicking around then, but now it's gotten a lot worse. And, because this defense is so good, they don't really need to pass that much. They're not in these shootouts. And it's just kind of hidden the blemishes of this offense. So, I think that they're going to find a little bit of trouble against Dallas, the way that Dallas is passing the ball all over the yard. Really interested to see how this game goes because it's kind of an unstoppable force and movable object situation. Like Dak has just been crushing it. And, whether it's Amari or Cobb or Gallup, it doesn't really matter. They're all getting theirs. And, obviously Stephon Gilmore is an incredible corner, but do they have enough bodies to cover all three of those dudes for the Cowboys?
Yeah, I think that's the question I was going to pose to you with Dallas. I mean, you've got guys that are at the top of their position fantasy wise. I mean, top 5 or 7 or so. When you look at Amari Cooper, you look at Zeke, and you look at Dak. I mean, obviously, what New England has done to pretty much everybody that they've faced this year is something that, aside from Lamar Jackson and company, has been something to watch. But this is a team I think that's going to be the truest test they've seen other than that Baltimore game. And does Dallas have the offensive firepower to combat what has been the strongest defense, the defense that's forced the most turnovers, the defense that's really stymied good offenses and made mediocre and bad offenses look even worse? So I think that's what intrigues me most about this game is, how do these Dallas offensive guys from a fantasy perspective match up against what's been the toughest test for anybody all year?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really tough for Zeke to get going. The Patriots have been the best in the league against running backs this season from a fantasy perspective. And, those have been good rushing offenses. They've beaten a lot of good running backs when you think all the way down the line, Singletary and, obviously like Le'Veon Bell, all these guys, they've crushed them. And Zeke hasn't exactly been, the best back this entire year. I doubt this is a game where he gets right. There will be opportunities here down the line, but I just don't think this is the week. I think, to me, again, just it goes full circle. Like the Cowboys are still going to score a little bit. I think it's just, can the Patriots score? Because they should against the Cowboys defense that's good, but not like great. I mean, the Patriots should be able to put points on them. I just don't like what we've seen the last few weeks. They just haven't been that team. So that, I think, therein lies what the result will be.
Yeah, so something's got to give. I kind of like Dallas at +7 in this one, to be honest. I think to your point, New England hasn't looked great, and it's not like they've been playing. Like you think about Philadelphia. That's not a great defense. It's been a pretty poor defense all year, and Tom Brady couldn't get things going. The run game's just been horrible the past couple weeks. Sony Michel's become non-existent. I don't know what to make of New England offensively. I mean, their defense, if they win, if they go to the Super Bowl, they make it there this year, that defense is going to be carrying them across the finish line.
Yeah, for sure. Although I will add that Isaiah Wynn gets activated this week. He's probably their best offensive lineman. He's off IR. I mean, that should help things, but man, I like you said, it's going to be their defense for sure if they get that far.
And we talked about another team whose defense has kind of been carrying them, and that's the San Francisco 49ers. I know I just kind of jokingly said that the Dallas-New England game is the game of the week because I knew that this was coming up. This is a game that was flexed into the Sunday night spot. Your Green Bay Packers are going to San Francisco in a game that reminds me so much of the 90s, and we had Brett Favre and Steve Young at the helm with these two teams. Anshu, I know you've got to be excited for this matchup and probably a bit nervous, but your Green Bay Packers come in as 3-point underdogs on the road, which says to me that this game is about even as far as Bovada is concerned. I mean, game of the year for your Packers. How do you see it shaking out?
I mean, it's going to be tough to go on the road and win that game. The Packers coming off the bye is nice. Like they did have that extra week of rest. They did go to LA earlier this year, 3 weeks ago against the Chargers and totally laid an egg. I think that they'll have learned from that experience for sure. But this game is essentially for home field. I mean, whoever wins it is too clear of the other. If the Niners win it, they're too clear of the Packers. It basically eliminates the Packers from the possibility of a 1 seed down the line if that were to happen. I think it's a great game. I think that, George Kittle play, his status is a huge, huge factor in this because, Jimmy Garoppolo has actually done a pretty good job here these last few weeks. We've talked about him a lot. I'm interested to get your opinion on him in this game specifically. But, I do think that the Packers are a little bit better than some of the teams they've played, and I think they're going to have to score a little bit. When you think of the Niners schedule, who they've played and who they will play, can they score 3 touchdowns? Because I think the Packers can do that, and I'm just not sure that Jimmy can lead them to that kind of score without Kittle.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a lot to learn about both of these quarterbacks in this game, and obviously it depends on the how the defenses show up. We've seen San Francisco have the best defense in the league at times, and then we've seen them give up a lot of points to Arizona. So yeah. I don't know which defense is going to show up on either. Same with Green Bay. Their defense has been inconsistent, but they've looked like the best defense in the league at least once or twice this season. So, but on the same token, Aaron Rodgers has looked like the Aaron Rodgers of old at times, and he's also looked very pedestrian at times. And we talked about the same criticisms of Jimmy Garoppolo. So I don't know if I can take a strong stance one way or another for either of these teams on either side of the ball because, I feel like this is a common theme we talk about every week with San Francisco. Like, we don't know how good Jimmy is. We don't know if this team can win a big game with him as their quarterback. And every now and then he'll show flashes. And last week he did that a couple times against Arizona and made some good throws into tight windows. But he still scares me when there's pressure. And I just don't know if he can win the big game. And we saw that against Seattle. So I don't know. I don't know if we're going to get the Jimmy Garoppolo that looks confident and looks like he's poised and can make the hard throws in the pocket. And I don't know if we're going to get the Aaron Rodgers who has been the best quarterback, that had the best arm, been able to make the most crazy throws into tight windows of anybody in the league. So that's what's got to give. Something's got to give between these two teams. Are the good defenses going to show up? Are the good quarterbacks going to show up? And that's what intrigues me here. And I think at this point in the year, finding those intriguing matchups, and we have a few of them again this week like we did last week. I mean, this is the time of the year where you hope to find out what a team is made of, and I just don't know which one's going to show up for either of these sides.
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very well said. If I had to pick the best unit of the 4, I think it's almost certainly San Francisco's defense. Yeah. But I also think that the worst unit of the 4 is clearly San Francisco's offense. So Agreed. It's like what gives? And I mean, we talked about the San Francisco schedule, but remember 2 weeks ago we came in and we knew they're playing Seattle, at Arizona, Green Bay, at Baltimore, at New Orleans, and then they play Seattle and the Rams again. They need to win these games, or else they're going to find themselves 10-6, 11-5, yep, with 5 losses in 7 games, and find
the 5 seed,
and find themselves in the 5 seed. And this is not a team, in my mind. I mean, they can win a game on the road because their defense, maybe even 2, but they're not making the Super Bowl as a wild card road team. I just do not see that happening with this specific quarterback and this specific team. So to me, I don't know if it's a must win, but it is a boy, you really should win this game. And I think I lean towards the Niners in this at 3 because I think that the two teams are very evenly matched, and I'm going to defer to the home team a little bit on that. But I think it's going to be a great game. Like, I really think that it's going to be a well played game, and I'm excited because I think it's a great referendum on, like you said, on both quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think it's worth recognizing as well. Deebo Samuel was your shoo-in of the week last week, and he ended up having another great game. And I think he's becoming and establishing himself as the number one receiver as Emmanuel Sanders can't stay on the field. So he's a guy. I mean, I started him last week in a league where I was kind of desperate at wide receiver, and I didn't feel great about it, but it ended up being a great call. And obviously you saw that, but is he a guy that's a must start in at a flex position for you at this point in leagues?
I think against the Packers, you almost have to. And I know that the idea is going to be, well, if Sanders doesn't play and Kittle doesn't play, then definitely. And yeah, I mean, that's obvious. But I think if Sanders does play, it actually helps Samuel because then Sanders is going to be matched up with Jair Alexander, which is a much worse matchup than Kevin King. And I think that Deebo can take advantage of Kevin King at times. So I actually would look towards it being a good thing for him if Emmanuel Sanders plays. With Kittle, it's just hard to know. But Samuel, of course, must pick up if he's out there. I think you almost have to start him in any league. I don't know how he's not a top 20 receiver right now.
All right, Baltimore and the Rams will close it out on Monday night. We've had some really, really bad matchups. This is probably the worst year as far as Monday Night Football matchups that I can remember. But Baltimore and LA is something that is a little bit of a breath of fresh air. The Rams get another primetime home game 2 weeks in a row. They're 3.5-point underdogs, though, at home against the Ravens. And we talked about how bad Jared Goff has been under pressure. I would expect Baltimore to be blitzing a lot in this game and putting pressure on Jared Goff. Todd Gurley did look good last week, but he started the game out with a fumble. You still worry a little bit about the injury there. Looks like they're going to get Brandon Cooks back a little quicker than they thought, but what do you make of this game on Monday night? Bovada, 46.5 points is the over-under, and like I said, the Rams 3.5-point dogs at home.
I absolutely love the under in this. I think that, while Lamar Jackson's been almost unstoppable, if you look at the cornerbacks in this matchup specifically, and even front seven guys, I mean, obviously you've got Jalen Ramsey and Marcus Peters and Jimmy Smith and those guys on the Baltimore side, which we talked about last week, by the way. I thought that was a really tough matchup for Houston with those receivers against those corners. I think that it's a similar situation here, but Baltimore's front is not as good, and I think that for that reason, the Rams will be able to run a little bit. But that being said, I just don't see either team passing a whole lot, and I think that the Rams with Wade Phillips are going to have an idea of how to slow down Lamar Jackson a little bit at home. I think this is kind of a crazy line to me. I know that the Ravens have looked like the best team in football over the last month, and the Rams are going the opposite direction, to your point. But it doesn't make sense to me that the Ravens would be 9-point favorites against the Rams at home. I just don't see that. I really, really like the Rams. In fact, they're my favorite line of this week.
Lock of the week?
That's I guess so. That's my lock of the week right there.
All right, we didn't get a sleeper from you. I know you have your ideas about some guys this week, especially that would help on a bye. I know we talked about a few guys that maybe you can plug and play, but is there somebody that stands out head and shoulders above the rest?
Oh, man, I really, really like Zach Pascal on Thursday night, especially if T.Y. Hilton doesn't play. I think that against that Texans defense, there's just going to be opportunities to score, and especially if Eric Ebron's out. I mean, Doyle and Pascal, I really, really like for the Colts.
All right, I like it. We've got a couple of things I really wanted to touch on here with the leftovers, but that wraps up our thoughts on Week 12 as we look ahead, and it's the last series of bye weeks, as we mentioned, Anshu. So this is the home stretch. We're heading toward the last quarter of the season, and one of our teams is in a playoff run, so that's good for you. I'll have somebody that I can at least root by way of my friend Anshu into the playoffs, because my Cincinnati Bengals they will be watching the college football playoff to see what their future is going to hold. So
yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. But I did want to get your thoughts on a couple things happening in the NBA world. Obviously, there have been a ton of injuries early this season, Anshu. There have been some guys coming back. Paul George hit a game winner last night against his old team, the Oklahoma City Thunder. We've got tons of guys dealing with injuries, but the big story, almost laughably, is Carmelo Anthony gets a chance now with the Portland Trail Blazers. Damian Lillard was injured, so he gets a start tonight. Do you think Carmelo can be a guy, and I know we've talked about this and we've kind of joked about the fact that he probably shouldn't be in the league, but I think Portland, if there's a team that maybe he could help a little bit because they could use that offense. We've had CJ McCollum having a bit of a down year. Portland's only 5-10 on the season. Obviously, they could really stand to get a little bit of a jolt to their offense. Do you think Carmelo can add any level of positive production for a team that's struggling right now?
I think so. Last we saw him, he's scoring, 13 points a game in 29 minutes for Houston. Obviously that was only a 10-game sample, but I just when you think of Portland and you think of their roster, they're lacking something, man. They are just short 2 scorers, and I know part of that is because Nurkic is hurt, but you think of Lillard and McCollum. Obviously, Lillard banged up right now, but they're just missing some juice. And now Zach Collins is out for a while. Anthony Simons hasn't quite been the guy that they're hoping for. He's obviously so young. I like the idea of Carmelo on this team right now. I think that this is the one team that it actually makes sense for him to sign with, and where he can probably offer the biggest boost. So while I don't think that he's very good anymore, I think that he can absolutely contribute in a role for them.
Yeah, and tonight wasn't the night. Obviously, he's knocking the rust off a little bit. He does finish 4 of 14, but the big stat that jumps out at me when I look at Carmelo's line is he had 5 turnovers, 5 personal fouls, and his plus-minus was -20.
That's so bad.
So the next worst on the team was Bazemore with a -10 plus or minus.
God, that's a bad sign. But
not a great look.
Not a good look. That does not bode well for what I just said. But I do think that in fits and starts, look, like you said, Lillard's not playing. They're not going into that game expecting to win. So here's your rust game, and hopefully he knocks it off. Because I'd like to see the Blazers be good. But man, 5-10 in that West is not the start you want to be on.
All right, what else have you seen? Obviously, we're early in the season, and our 2 teams are both kind of already looking like they're going to start tanking. What do you think the Bulls? What's their direction right now at this point in the season? And they have looked better than my Cavs, but what's the direction as you look ahead? I mean, you've seen some good things out of Markkanen. Obviously, Kobe White, I know, is not a guy that you are in love with and who they drafted in the first round, but he's looked good at times in relief. What do you make of the Bulls as they look forward, and kind of what do you see as their direction?
Yeah, I mean, who knows what their direction is, man? It is a disaster. But I actually think Markkanen's been kind of a disappointment overall. He's been a little bit less decisive. Yeah, he's shooting 26% from 3. He's been, his shot's just not falling right now. I expect him to get a lot better, actually. But Wendell Carter has been such an amazing revelation to me. In terms of his efficiency, his effective field goal percentage is absurd, 60%. He's just already that guy for them. He's 20 years old and he is the veteran studying, sort of influence. And I mean, everyone compared him to Al Horford, and he just feels like that guy for them. So I think he's a guy that I would absolutely lock down on this roster. And I wasn't the biggest fan of his coming out. So, it takes something for me to say that. But yeah, I mean, he specifically to me has been a bright spot, but everything else, especially Jim Boylan, is just an unmitigated disaster on this garbage franchise.
I almost like to ask you the questions just so because I do it every time we talk about the Bengals. You could hear my voice rise and me getting angrier and angrier. And when you think about basketball, I can't be angry with what the Cavs are doing. I mean, Tristan Thompson's looked really, really good this year. Mm-hmm. Colin Sexton has taken a huge step forward. Darius Garland to me looks not great, but it's so early on that it's hard to tell. And Kevin Love's still facing injuries, so the Cavs are kind of a hodgepodge that is just a mess. They don't play defense, but I actually get excited to watch them play. And
you should.
And it's more so about seeing some of these young guys develop. I don't think they have a core right now to become competitive, but maybe they get a top 5 pick again, and then there's I don't know. It's not a free agent destination. I think our 2 teams might be in the basement for a little while in the NBA.
I would gladly trade the Bulls' entire franchise for the Cavs right now in their spot. I love Beeline, and like you said, I think Sexton's taken a serious step forward. His efficiency is way better than what it was last year. He's shooting 36% from three. Like that's really good for 4 threes a game for a guy that, wasn't the best 3-point shooter either last year or in college. And like Garland, he's just so young and inexperienced. I mean, he's basically a guy out of high school if you think about it, with just a year off. And I think that they'll find a way to move some of these resources around because they have a smart-ish front office. And I think this is a good draft to have a top 5 pick and supplement what they've got. So I would be excited if I were you, especially more than the stupid Bulls.
Cautiously optimistic for the future of the Cavs, but hey, it's NBA season, but we've got some football to finish up. We got through week 12 again. Anshu, was there anything that you wanted to add before we let our listeners get to the rest of their week and look forward to week 12?
No, sir. Let's do it. Let's try to turn this ship around. In my case,
let's get a W, Bengals. If there's a time to do it, this weekend against the beat up Pittsburgh Steelers would be the time.
Yes.
For Anshu Khanna, I am Josh Dunn. Our time has come to an end on the Underdog Sports Fantasy Hour. We'll see you guys next week.